Hi all, I think we are pretty much everyone here. So we can start, and then if we have other participants, we'll admit them at some point. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sofia. I'm the part of SmartUp Social Innovation Lab, the lead of the initiative Future Cities of Southeast Europe, supported by Climate KIC, the City of Skopje, and UNDP North Macedonia. I'm so glad to have so many people present today. We've sent several invitations, and gladly we got almost 80% accepting the invitation to listen to today's presentation on the economic case for decarbonization in Skopje. So before I give a little bit of intro, I would like to ask Casper from Material Economics to start off with the introduction around the economic case, and Tim Taylor, our regional leader of the orchestration team working on the Future Cities initiative, to give a few words, and then I can share a little bit about the initiative here locally, what we are working in Skopje, and then give back the floor to Material Economics to present the results of the economic case for decarbonization in Skopje. Casper or Robert?
I believe we're thinking you were going to take the slides, Sophia, but maybe...
Or I can start with this slide. Okay, that's fine. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the initiative we are working or implementing here in Skopje, together with the four other cities from the region, including Niš from Serbia, Križevci from Croatia, Maribor from Slovenia, and Sarajevo from Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we are on this mission to make our cities one of the best possible places to live, work, and visit in Europe by 2025, and with that achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. We have four main goals we are aiming to achieve, and that's the first one, and to solve the most pressing issues for our region, which is to bring the air quality in our cities within the recommended limits defined by the World Health Organization. Second, to initiate or achieve circular and net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2030. Ensure by 2025 that all members of our community have equal access to fundamentals of well-being, as decent housing, healthcare, education, mobility, food, and so on. And the fourth is to reduce the year-on-year impacts on the heat and flooding in our communities. We started working from September 2019. It's almost a year and few months from our work. There have been several activities that we've been working on, and one of these is our joint work with the Material Economics on the design of the economic case for decarbonization of Skopje. So today I'm really excited to hear what are the results for Skopje, despite we've been continuously involved in the whole process and collaborated not only with Material Economics, but locally with the team of MANU here and the City of Skopje in activities of collecting data, assuring that everything that is provided to Material Economics is updated and in compliance with all the strategic documents and materials and analysis been working here. So that's from me on short. For all other activities of what we are doing, we can discuss a little bit later on the time for question and answers. But now I would give back the floor to Casper or to Tim. I don't know who wants to go first, to introduce a little bit more about why we are doing actually this and how this will impact in our further work in making our city one of the best possible places to live, work, and visit.
I think a little more context is with me, Sophia, but well done. Thank you for an excellent introduction. You can hear me okay, I guess, just to check. Yeah. Wonderful. So hi everyone, I'm Tim Taylor. Nice to see some familiar faces and names on the list. So welcome back, and welcome if we haven't had a chance to meet before. As Sophia says, the work we're doing with Skopje and other cities across the region is a really exciting and powerful first move, I think, with under the umbrella of what we're calling thriving communities. And you can see the mission goals that we've set there. They're designed to be almost confronting, exciting, and at the same time, how on earth would we do that? And that's one of the key principles of the work we try and do, is this really mission-led approach. And it's great in recent months that that's been really reinforced by the recommendations of the mission boards and for Europe, one on cities, which is focused on exactly the same, one of the same goals around climate neutrality by 2030, also around regions and building resilience. Ultimately, I think these things are intertwined, and the key aspect of actually making cities the best possible places they can be for the communities. And as Sophia said, I mean, solving things like air pollution are critical goals. They will lead to similar actions, and you're going to hear today about some of the economics around this, but let's bring interventions that solve air pollution quickly and climate at the same time. So really starting with a strong mission is a key part of what we do. Helping to build the capacity and the organization models locally. So helping teams and organizations and change makers in each city and each community to work together. So you'll have heard about what we've called the Yes Team idea, and really exciting to hear about development of the sort of foundation model and new ways of working and collaborating, and to have so many of the organizations that care and are helping to create the future Skopje on the line today to think more about this. And another key part of what we do is really not just thinking about what we want to change, but actually really trying to understand why haven't we already changed that? Why is the air not clean already in Skopje? Technically, we actually know pretty well what needs to be done. Why are we not managing to bring that change about fast enough and at the scale needed? So thinking about what we call enablers of change, collaboration, the role municipalities and policy and procurement play in that, data systems and digitalization. And I guess the focus for today, also the blog post we've shared with you in advance around how do we get this done economically? How do we afford to do it? How do we invest in it? So with that, let's hand over to the material economics team. This little graph here on the right, they will show you some far more professional looking graphs today, but this is just designed to be illustrative, and it's really the role of the work material economics do around understanding what this case could look like. And it's difficult analysis, so I think Skopje is very fortunate to have this, and it starts to give us this picture when you look at the investment that's really needed in a mission-led approach, but also the value of that investment to the community and how much higher would that be, and therefore what's the business case. And then if we compare the yes teams, the cost of actually starting this work, it barely shows up on this picture, we believe. So hopefully this economic case will really help us to understand the potentials, tell the story about what needs to be done in Skopje, and start to really plan the next phase of the action that must be done, not necessarily feels that like it can be done today, but how do we find a way to do what must be done is being one of our core principles. So I hope you will find, I'm sure you'll find this insightful. So Casper, Robert, and the team, over to you. Thanks a lot. Looking forward.
Yeah,
thanks.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Tim.
I'll just go super quickly, Robert, with just the ground rules for today, just to set up a little bit of a structure, since we have a lot of material to go through. We will have a scheduled questions and discussion session after each part of the presentation, so please do save your questions for that. We can get through the material. If you have questions that you want to remember, feel free to put them in the chat, and we will notice them and make sure that they get answered, and keep track of them. And during the session and the question sessions as well, do use the raise hand function, especially now that we're so many people, so we can kind of keep track of everyone and make sure everyone gets the chance to ask a question or make a comment. That's all. The agenda for today, I think, has already been sent out a little bit ahead of time, but we will start with a super quick executive summary. of the main results for Skopje. So going really quickly through the objectives and methodology for the economic case, and then summarizing the main results and recommendations that we have for the city, and ending that with a quick discussion. I think we'll try to have a 5-minute break before going into the detailed results after that, for those who want to dive more into the details. So we'll go through the scenarios that we've set up for Skopje, the deeper economic implications and also employment impacts of that analysis, and also go through the sector by sector results and recommendations in more detail. And each of these segments will have a question session for discussion after it. So with that, I'll hand over to Robert for the summary.
Excellent, thank you. So maybe we can move to next pages. You can skip this one. Thank you. No, and also of course, Kasper showed the agenda for today, but basically we will talk through kind of what is it really that we have done, and I should say kind of this is work building on quite detailed work we have done with Skopje, but we have also done the same work or very similar work with Madrid, with Milano, with the Leuven outside of Brussels, with Vienna, and so on. So we have done this type of work with several cities across Europe. And then we have, of course, kind of specifically tailored it for Skopje to make all of the results specific for Skopje and all of the kind of local circumstances and local challenges to make it as relevant as possible. So we'll talk through that and describe what it is really that we have done and how we have gone about it, and then we'll be very happy to discuss all of those results. And of course, some of these results I think will be important also kind of how to think about the journey going forward. That what does this actually mean for how Skopje can think about your, if we call it a climate and economic strategy going forward? How can you attract investments in these areas? How can you structure financing, and how can you really get this to happen? Because there's a lot of economic benefits in this transition. But we'll talk through that, and hopefully we'll give you a good explanation of what it is that we have done and how it can be helpful going forward. I think you can take the next page. Yes, so and a little bit of introduction, yes, who we are. So I'm Robert Westerdahl. We're based in Stockholm, Material Economics. We founded the company about 4 years ago. I've been working in the climate and energy space for about 12 years now, starting at McKinsey & Company. And then after that, we founded Material Economics. I spent most of my career in kind of industry, finance, and working with different governments on the whole climate transition. But over the last 3 years, I basically applied a lot of that knowledge to what does that mean for the transition that cities need to do. And as a company, we have then worked with all of the cities I mentioned across Europe, but we also work with a lot of governmental organizations, and we also work with the private sector across energy, electricity, finance, banking, transportation, and so on. So we're trying to cover kind of basically all sectors of the economy, but our sole focus is basically how to manage the economic and strategic implications for kind of how to manage the whole transition to meet ambitious climate targets and meet climate change. And the work we've done with cities, where I mentioned a number of the cities we have worked with, and everything has been circling around kind of assessing the economic impacts and implications of this transition. And this has been work kind of led by EIT Climate KIC, but we've also worked with other cities independent of that program, and we've also worked with the EU's Missions Board for climate neutral cities, helping them kind of structure the financing program then for how to address kind of climate neutrality for cities across Europe. So that is kind of a little bit of our background, and we're very happy to have been doing this work with Skopje, and I hope you will find these results interesting. So we can move to next. Yes, and a little bit of background just for the methodology. So the whole kind of purpose of the economic analysis that we have done is basically to enable and kind of, if we say, translate the strategies and the environmental plans and climate plans into kind of a what does that mean economically, and really kind of try to quantify the economics of the whole transition for Skopje, but then also to use that to build then the rationale and support with this strategy development for how can you further improve the ambition on climate action, and how does that tie to your economic ambitions and growth ambitions, and how does it tie to investments in other areas and so on in the city. So it's more kind of putting economic numbers to the whole climate transition, and not only kind of CO2 numbers. And what we have done is, of course, working with a lot of local partners here in Skopje, but then we also worked with researchers across Europe and globally, kind of when putting together this model. And we, of course, also used a lot of knowledge then from the work that we have done with other cities across Europe. So to basically kind of build then a very kind of firm baseline for Skopje based on local data, very specific data to Skopje about the transportation system, of the energy system, about how buildings are heated, and so on. So basically have kind of, we built then a bottom up, a detailed description of how kind of the whole energy system in Skopje works. Then we have quantified and done we would say a rough projection then of how emissions of CO2 could develop until 2030. Then we have looked at specifically the whole transportation system, the whole electricity system or electricity use in the city, and heating in buildings. And then we've looked at those sectors, emissions from those sectors, and we have developed 10, I think we're at 14 or 15 different initiatives or levers how to reduce emissions. And then we have kind of quantified how those levers reduce emissions, but also how they impact air quality in the city, and then what the economic impacts of that is. So basically the investments required, the energy cost impact, the health cost impact, and so on, and put all of that together into a overall analysis of the total economics of the transition. And basically you will see a presentation now that is quite detailed, but to go with this, we should also say that this is a starting point of the analysis. We have now kind of put all of this together and gotten to the first set of numbers and the first analysis that I hope will be very valuable at this stage, but we will also kind of leave behind us as well, kind of after this, a very detailed model to continue be able to do this type of analysis and continue to work with this and kind of adopt this type of approach to enable much more of a data-driven approach and an economic approach to climate action going forward, and to attract investments and plan investments and set your climate strategy going forward. So you can go to the next page. Yes, and here it was I described a little bit of this before, but basically, so as I said, we have the input, so baseline data for the city, how this kind of population growth, development of technology, and the targets and ambitions that have been set. And then we have also developed a specific scenario for Skopje until 2030. Then we'll look at, and then we'll show a couple of these slides, kind of decarbonization potential of all of the different measures that have been analyzed, the total economic case, so basically how much investments are required and what economic savings or cost savings for energy and cost savings from health benefits that will accrue from these investments. And then we'll put together a couple of points on kind of what does this mean going forward, and what are the recommendations that we take out from this analysis. So you can go to next. And this is maybe a bit boring slide. We'll come to the numbers soon, but I think it's just good to understand a little bit of what are the different types of initiatives that we have analyzed. So these are across main sectors of transportations, buildings and heating, electricity and waste. And across each of these, you'll see a number of different initiatives. So we've looked in transportations, for example, reducing transportation need through, for example, remote working, and that we've seen a lot of now in this pandemic. But we have also looked at electrification of passenger cars, buses, optimizing logistics, and so on. So basically looking at different types of levers across both people transport, but also transport of goods in the city. And then in buildings and heating, we've looked at, of course, renovating for energy efficiency. We've looked at kind of efficient lighting appliances. We have looked at replacing wood burning and fossil fuels in local heating in buildings, as that has a major impact on air quality. We've looked at investments in expanding district heating network, but also in replacing fossil fuels in district heating. And for electricity, which is, and of course, a important enabler for both the transportation and buildings and heating initiatives. We've looked at both rooftop solar, but also utility scale solar and wind that would, of course, happen outside of the city. But then we have also added investments in electricity storage and grid infrastructure, even though those have not kind of been analyzed as deeply, but it is based on kind of benchmarks that we have seen in other areas for how much investments are required in those to enable electrification of heating in buildings and electrification of transportation. And then we have looked at waste as well, on what type of kind of different initiatives there to improve collection, sorting, and recycling, and so on, to reduce or improve basically the centralized incineration and energy recovery from waste. So these are just so everyone kind of on the same page. Kind of what are the type of initiatives we have looked at? Should also say that we have not looked at agriculture. We have not looked at kind of heavy industry and that type of initiatives, and that is because most cities kind of then the majority of emissions and the majority of air pollution comes from transportations, heating, and electricity. But that could, of course, be a next step to also look at emissions that have not been covered in this first study. Okay, can take next page. So, and as I mentioned, we covered transportation, heating, electricity. That accounts for roughly half of emissions. I should say here, buildings and heating, it looks like it's very small emissions, but it's because there's a lot of wood being used, so biofuels, which is accounted for as kind of zero fossil emissions. And also all of the electricity that's used for heating in buildings is accounted for in the electricity bucket. But then there's about half of emissions that's accounted for Skopje have not been addressed in this analysis, and that is from industry, from agriculture, and other sectors that could be, of course, included in the next analysis. Good, and we can look at then some results coming out of this, and this may be a bit complicated. Sorry. Yes.
Sorry, I have to interrupt because the slides are continuing. My name is Andos Cassandra, coming from the Cabinet of the Deputy Prime Minister in charge of Economic Affairs. I have a question. If you could go back 2 slides before. Thank you. So basically, I haven't seen a lot of participants from the city of Skopje. I have a question because the same or similar analysis is done by EBRD Green Cities facility. Can you just tell me, are we doing duplication here? Because they just finished the GCAP, Green Cities Action Plan. So a lot of the sectors that are analyzed here have been analyzed in the GCAP as well. So I would need clarification on this. Thank you.
Yes, no, so absolutely that there might be some overlap in the kind of starting point and the analysis of these sectors. I think what we have done, which is very specific to the city of Skopje, I think is kind of that has been tailored then specifically to the city and how the city can integrate these in their plans going forward. But of course, we would be very interested in, of course, discussing kind of how this work can be kind of aligned, or how it can be merged together kind of going forward, and how we can share kind of insights and results and improve the overall view going forward.
And just one more thing, the local environmental action plan from the city of Skopje is currently for public consultation, given for public consultation, and the GCAP is integrated within the local environmental action plan. So I don't see the added value of this analysis. I mean, a lot has been done, so that's why I'm trying to figure out this analysis, what they will bring out, because the local environmental action plan is in public debate. So
yeah, no, that's a very good point. So let us go through this presentation and let's discuss kind of how this can bring an additional perspective to that. And maybe there are very kind of significant overlaps, and maybe there are areas that have not been that can be complementary, and that we can then kind of discuss how it can further contribute then to your further work in this area. Yeah, so that's thank you for that intervention. Good. If I go back as to kind of some of the results, we'll talk about some of the investments required as well, and we'll go into the deep dive sessions soon. But basically, when we have looked at the projections for CO2 emissions up until 2030, and then looking at kind of how and setting kind of a very ambitious implementation pace for the different levers I've just described, we see kind of how what is a potential scenario that could bring Skopje to near zero emissions for each of these sectors. We basically look at a scenario that would eliminate about 97% of CO2 emissions from transportation, buildings and heating, electricity generation, and waste. This is not then covering emission reductions across other sectors. So it is an extremely high ambition level. That is also an ambition level that we worked with many other cities that are setting kind of climate neutral targets for 2030. So this is a lot higher ambition level than many cities in reality have in their plans right now or in their investment agenda. But we have developed a scenario like this to show what is required to be able to reach this, but what does it also mean in economic terms, in investments, air pollution, and so on. So that is kind of on the left, how it would impact the emissions. And on the right, we have looked at, and this is kind of estimating the economic impacts from air pollution. And this is primarily then from NOx and PM emissions, and how that cost would decrease from an estimate at 2020 to 2030. And as you can see here, kind of we have then kind of, this is estimated based on each of the different kind of source of NOx and PM emissions from cars, buses, trucks, but also from different types of heat generation. So from wood burning, from different kind of burning different fossil fuels and so on for heat generation. We have also looked at electricity generation and what type of air pollution that generates to come up with that total estimate. And then we've looked at kind of with implementation of very aggressive then climate action interventions, how that kind of the impact from air pollution could be brought down to not to zero, but be brought down by basically 95% by 2030. So this is kind of the overall results, and I will talk through a bit kind of what is required to reach this. So Kasper, if you go jump to the next. So basically estimating then based on electrifying car and bus fleets and truck fleets, about renovating a large portion of the building stock, about replacing heating with electric heat pumps, with the investments in electricity infrastructure, electricity generation, and all of that. So basically doing all of the investments that would be required to basically reach this very ambitious target I just described on the last page. We estimate a total investment need of about 2.3 billion euros. It's of course enormous investments, but when we also look at what is actually the economic impact of that, then the dark green shade is basically looking at cost savings from more efficient energy use. And that is from, if you run an electric car over its lifetime, it will consume much cheaper fuel over its lifetime compared to petrol. If you have a much more energy efficient building, it will use less energy and by that cost less to run, and so on. So we basically looked at all of the cost savings from both electrifying but also much more efficient energy system, transportation system, and heating system. And that accounts for about 2.9 or almost 3 billion euros. So it's actually slightly more than the investments required. But this is accounted for over the time period 2020 to 2050, or over the lifetime of all of the assets that are being invested in. And when it comes to additional cost savings, it's actually about twice as much as the energy savings comes from savings from improved health, which is basically coming primarily from improved air quality in the city. That then has, of course, very significant impacts on less respiratory diseases, cardiovascular disease, and so on. And this is an estimate then based on kind of research showing kind of what the estimated economic impact is from air pollution from NOx and PM. So we put all of that together to basically show that, well, of these 2.3 billion euros, about 2.9 billion would be saved directly with energy over 30 years. And then additional about 6 billion could be saved from improved healthcare, or basically improved health and reduced healthcare costs and increased productivity. If we look at cash flow, that's of course a very big challenge to this transition. Most of the investments need to happen between 2020 and 2030, so that the red bars on the right. Some savings would accrue over the same time period, but maybe about 30 to 40% of the total savings. But more savings would then come over the period 2030 to 2050. So this is, of course, when one considers a investment that accrues savings over a very long time horizon. So that's also, of course, one of the big challenges, that one need to mobilize very significant investment at this stage, but that can generate a lot of economic benefits for the whole region in this transition. And then another perspective, you can take next, Kasper. Yes, another perspective is also kind of looking at where does this money go, and how does it impact job creation, and what is basically then the local impacts of this transition. And we have looked at kind of all of the investments that are required. Are they of a kind of international character, that you buy products that are manufactured abroad? Are they kind of primarily national or of a regional nature? You know, if we talk about regional, or it's in the city or the close vicinity of the city, that is, if you think of investments in installing rooftop solar, installing heat pumps, improvements in the public transportation infrastructure, and so on. That's money that would stay in the region, and then parts of investments would go kind of nationally, and then about 1 billion would go internationally. That is kind of, if we take solar panels manufactured in China, or electric vehicles manufactured in Germany, and so on. But still, a significant portion of the investment would happen in the region or nationally, or that would basically directly benefit the region or nationally. And then out of the cost savings, a lot of the cost savings would actually be from, if we call it international cost savings, which is from, you know, when one moves from a fossil fuel-based transportation system that is dependent on oil extraction, that is imported, that would basically be moved from if we call it an international expenditure to more of kind of regional or national expenditure, when it turns into electricity instead of then fossil fuels or oil. So we've looked at all of the different initiatives from that perspective. So that would basically reduce significantly how kind of the outflow of money from the region. And then that could then, of course, kind of generate more local cost savings that stimulates, of course, the economy. And that's kind of a very high level on the kind of overall monetary flows from this transition. But then if we look at the right-hand side, we've also looked at kind of the job creation potential. And overall, we estimate about 15,000 jobs or years of employment that could be created in this transition. A lot of it, or about half, coming from building envelope renovations. There's, of course, a very labor-intensive investments, but then has a lot of kind of cost savings potential, but then creates a lot of local jobs. But also renewable electricity, BRT network, electric vehicle charging networks, and active mobility infrastructure, for example, bicycling network and so on. All of those will be kind of investments that will have local benefits, but also create local jobs for this transition. So this is also a very positive kind of story in job creation and economic growth for the region. Yes, Kasper can go to next page. And then of course, kind of these are just very high level results, and I guess a lot of you maybe think of kind of where does this come from, and what are the numbers based on. We'll go through that next, but let me just pause here and just give you an overview of what do we see as some of the important kind of recommendations based on the analysis that we see, kind of based on the specifics that we see for Skopje, but also building them on the experience that we have from other cities. So one part is of course kind of the enabling the shift from car-based transport to public transport and walking, cycling generates a lot of with cost savings directly for if we look at the cost savings for people using their cars less. That's directly in fuel and capital value for the cars, but it's also of course generating a lot of air quality and health benefits in improving having more active mobility. I think that's maybe one of the most obvious areas. When we look at electrification, I think we've been in quite a lot of discussions that with the high CO2 intensity of the electricity grid, electrifying cars today is maybe not the most sensible from a CO2 perspective, but when looking at a trajectory of investing aggressively in also the decarbonizing the electricity grid, then actually electrification of passenger cars, which is kind of the majority of the transportation fleet, but also buses and trucks, will both improve air quality. It will reduce the cost or the marginal cost of transportation, and it will reduce CO2 emissions and noise in the city and the region. This, of course, requires quite a lot of upfront investments, additional investments compared to non-electric cars, so diesel or petrol cars, but it will accrue savings over the car's lifetime due to the much less expensive cost per kilometer driven compared to fossil fuel cars, but those savings accrue over longer time to compensate the higher investment cost. But to find ways to stimulate that transition, I think will come with significant benefits as the availability of electric cars will increase. But that also means, of course, that one needs to invest quite a lot in the charging infrastructure and the grid infrastructure to allow for that transition to happen. And in buildings and heating, I think the kind of having a large-scale building envelope renovation program, I think that comes with a multitude of different benefits, from job creation to long-term kind of asset value improvements in the building stock, to reduced energy use and reduced air quality, or reduced pollution to air, so improving air quality, but also reduced emissions of CO2. So I think that is, of course, a very, very interesting part, and where also heating is quite kind of carbon intensive, or when it's based a lot on the wood burning, it's of course comes with a lot of air quality issues. And so they're kind of both investing in large scale building renovations, but also investing in really decarbonizing the heating systems, also when one can avoid only doing the full envelope renovations. Just investing also in the heating system is very, very economically sensible from both an air pollution point of view, but also to an efficiency point of view. But that will also require some enabling infrastructure in the electric grid, energy storage, and so on. But there we see kind of the quality of heat pumps and also the quality of district heating is improving, and that can allow them for a very cost-efficient transition. And in electricity, I think we also see there, of course, electricity will be a very major part of this transition, as it will be kind of enabling a lot of the initiatives in buildings and heating and transportation. And we see costs coming down rapidly for renewable electricity, both utility scale wind and solar, but also rooftop solar. And then also electricity storage is coming down quickly in cost, and that can allow then for a cost-efficient transition that then also reduces, of course, local air pollution significantly and CO2 emissions. And here, and this of course needs to come with an additional investments in grid capacity, electricity storage, and so on to allow for this transition. So this is not something that happens overnight, but needs to be integrated, of course, in a long-term plan to allow for much more renewable electricity in the grid that can then support also the transition in the other sectors. Good. Yes, thank you. So my final slide, and then I'll stop talking. I'm very happy to engage in much more discussion. So as I said a couple of words in the beginning, as we have done this analysis now for several different cities across Europe, and I think what we have seen is that it is a bit of an eye-opener when looking at this from a kind of a pure economic perspective, but also I think what is important to note is that we are not looking at what are the investments the municipality or the city needs to take. We are looking at what are the investments required in the region by all stakeholders, by citizens, by private property owners, by the municipality, but also by the public transport authority and so on. So what is it that everyone, so all of the investment numbers we showed, that is what everyone needs to chip in the city to succeed with this transition. And that I think is a very important perspective. And in that case, and then what we have looked at for different cities, the share of investments required for cities is maybe between 10 and 20% of the total investment need. And the rest needs to be taken by other stakeholders. So the city and the national government will more have an enabling role to enable the investments that everyone else needs to do to succeed with the whole transition. I think that is a very important perspective. That is something that kind of to take a step now from kind of these very high level numbers to translate that into what does that mean in different projects, different kind of programs, who should finance what, how can one structure, how can one find the business models that can allow for these investments to happen. So I think that is kind of course a step after this, but this is more kind of setting and a first analysis, setting the baseline, developing a good understanding of the starting point and what this could yield. But of course, much more is needed then to translate this into kind of large-scale investment programs. So this is more kind of a starting point. It's not the end point. It's a starting point for further analysis and further work to really scale up this transition. And this work, kind of, we will not kind of within the program as it is set now, we will not kind of be funded for participating further after this year. But this work will be carried on by many of the local partners, and we are of course happy to continue to contribute to this work and all of the further work that is needed. And we will also hand over the tool that we have developed to basically do all of this analysis, so that can also be carried on. But we will also, of course, also be available for further discussions on how to elaborate the tool and expand it and improve it for different ambition levels, additional areas, and so on. That is something we have done with several cities that we have also done this first analysis for. And yeah, so that's maybe wrapping up my just overall presentation, but I think, yeah, very happy to take questions and discuss.
Thank you, Robert. So first, thank you so much for this presentation. I believe this is such an added value for everything that the city is working on, and added value for their strategies and plans, including the GCAP and the lab. We've been working and still in the process of analyzing the overall work and strategic documents of the city and seeing how this model can add this additional value to it, because currently what is done is in generally have taken in perspective 20 to 30% decrease into gases and emission by 2030. And what we're doing here, it's more of like how we can achieve or become carbon neutral by 2030. So going in a more ambitious scenario. And as you said, measuring and providing information on how every actor in the system, aside from the City of Skopje, can join in and take a role into providing further investment or environment and policies to enable this kind of energy transition. So that's on short from me. Thank you once more. And now if the participants have question, please feel free. Anyone having a question? Would like to comment something? This means either was too clear or it was too much confusing. If there is no question or comments, then maybe, Robert, we can continue with the second part, which is the longer part. And I invite everyone who is more interested to get into a more detailed information of the results and how each of the parts affects different sectors and where we see impact and who is involved in the whole process. It can stay. For the ones that doesn't really have time, feel free to send questions furthermore, and you will receive analyses of the work we do after the presentation today. So either Robert or Casper can take now the second part and go into more details around the analysis.
Yes, and before you start that, Casper, I should also say to everyone on the call that please reach out also to us if you want to have kind of a individual discussion and get a bit deeper into parts of this material. We're of course very happy to do that. I understand it's a lot to take in this session, but we'll also distribute all of the slides that have been shown today, and we'll distribute that afterwards. But we're happy to take individual discussions as well after.
Great. So before Casper takes, I will just read one comment we received from, I guess it's the Ministry of Environment, saying that the material can be used in further developing an integrated energy and climate plans, which together with the Ministry of Economy is planning to introduce as an opportunity under the revised law on energy. And they appreciate exchange of this material. Thanks, Ministry of Environment. Okay, Casper.
Sophia, just Tim here.
Yeah, please, Tim.
I mean, just to pick up on I think we'd love to pick up on the question also around the Green City Action Plan. And so hopefully Robert's presentation helped to sort of clarify a bit of where we see the difference. And I think, more to learn. But my understanding is the Green City Action Plan's got a bit over 500 million worth of actions, sort of more bottom-up built of what can we be doing next, what can we prioritize, and it goes beyond, as it should, just the decarbonisation. So what Robert has presented is analysis of really how to decarbonise half of the emissions of Skopje, greenhouse gas emissions, with the associated, obviously, really close link to solving air pollution at the same time, which is only part of our overall mission. When you look at what Sophia covered at the beginning in terms of the best possible place to live, a lot of that is certainly around water and public spaces and building quality and jobs, etc. But even Robert's numbers showed 2.3 billion worth of investment needed. And that's only half the greenhouse gas emissions, and it doesn't include many of the other sectors yet, which would ideally, if we had that sort of top-down economic case for everything we need to do, it would be probably orders of magnitude bigger. So ultimately, this is what we're really trying to nurture with the mission approach. It's how many billions would Skopje have to invest to really achieve that mission? And Robert and the team's analysis gives us some of that picture, but by no means all. And ultimately, if we could bring that together with in an ideal world, we won't have every single thing planned out, but we do need to get to that order of, well, this is a greater speed and scale of action and investment than communities are managing anywhere, not just in Skopje, but from Vienna to Leuven to Malmö to and around the world, not just Europe. So hopefully that's where the sort of coming together of the sort of top-down analysis to the building up action plans, and that's also part of this process management that we try to take with building these portfolios. So it's a yes and scenario, I would emphasize. But it would be great to work more. I think one of the goals we'd like to really do is come together with the EBRD team and work how we can add these things together in the next phase would be excellent.
Yeah, and if I can just add a little bit on that. So I think also, considering what I said just a couple of minutes ago, that when looking at it from a city perspective, that of all of the investments required to actually succeed with this transition, about between 10 and 20% of the investments can actually be taken by the city, and all of the other investments need to be taken by other stakeholders across the city. That also means, of course, that the city needs to be a very important kind of enabler, and they need to work with kind of enabling these investments to happen. But there, I think also the collaboration with the national government will be extremely important to get this to happen, because of course the mandate for the city and is not kind of the as broad as the mandate for the national government. So really combining those to make this happen and really discuss on how to make it happen, I think will be very important to bring it all together.
Thank you, Robert. I think we don't have...
Hello, can I... Yeah. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Biljana Miloševska. I'm a senior banker of EBRD Skopje, and I was the operation leader of the GCAP. Guys, thanks a lot. You did a great job. Basically, I think that if we look at the GCAP as a one big plan, what are the challenges or what are the let's say, priorities ahead of Skopje in the next, if I remember correctly, GCAPs is about 10 or 15 years. You are, let's say, assignment facilitates and will help Skopje how to get to meet some of those priorities. As I noticed at the beginning, actually GCAP, and you identified the very key critical points. It is the district heating, it is transport, it is sewage, I think solid waste. So more or less we are along the same lines in terms of where the key investments should go in order Skopje to start decarbonizing. Maybe just to brief you, I don't know, are you aware? Tomorrow our bus rapid transport project is on the board for approval of EBRD board. So basically, in terms of the discussion, we started working on your 2 billions. Provided the first 100, put it in that way. It is also the BRT, the highest priority of BRT is to help to reduce the pollution in the city of Skopje, to allow citizens to have a better form of massive transport and to reduce the intensity of using the private cars. This is a definitely long target or long goal of this project. I also think that yes, there are common topics where we can discuss, we can work together, and if we all assume that the ultimate goal is to help Skopje to get to meet 2030, the target that there is overlapping areas where we can keep exploring, and maybe if the city or the state or on the other of relevant institution willing to consider even invest together. So yes, thanks a lot. Very interesting presentation. Glad to that we are invited to here, and yeah, let's we will keep the right to approach you if we need some of your useful data for our analysis. Thanks a lot.
Yep, thank you. Very happy to contribute. Good. Do we have some
questions further or comments? I guess no. So Casper, you can take over.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. I was thinking, since we're going to get into a lot more numbers now, if it would be useful for everyone to have a 5-minute break to stretch your legs, get a glass of water, and freshen up the mind, so we're able to take in the rest of this information. So maybe, if possible, we can start again 5 past, and we will start again 5 past sharp to get through the rest. But everyone just take a couple of minutes to clear your minds and get ready to get to the next part.
That's good, Tim. So 3 and 5, we'll back here, take a little break, and see you in a bit. This was a nice break, Casper.
Yeah, I think I've learned this from Tim, actually, that it's impossible to take in any new information after you've already spent an hour in a meeting like this, especially a meeting with pretty intense number-heavy slides like this.
Yeah.
Let's just hope everyone gets back until
1 minute.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, it's 5 past, so let's dive into the detailed results. And I think we covered a lot of this already in the executive summary, and as we had a little bit more discussion than perhaps expected, I will perhaps jump a few of these slides, but we'll get to all the important points that weren't already covered. So we'll start with a little bit of a rundown of the different scenarios that we've modeled for Skopje. We modeled 2 different scenarios, and we'll go into the differences between them. And then we'll deep dive into economic implications and employment impacts of those scenarios and of this transition a little bit deeper, and then go sector by sector with results for each individual sector, and then also recommendations and kind of key actions to go forward in each of these sectors. And we have a question session at the end of each of these short segments. So do save your questions for that. There will be plenty of time for questions and discussion. But to jump into the scenarios then, or actually start with a little bit more background first. We already showed this slide, but just to remind everyone that these are the sectors that we are looking at in this analysis: transportation, buildings and heating, electricity, and waste. And remaining emissions in industry and agriculture and so far are, of course, still very important to make sure to analyze. Did I lose everyone out? No, I'm still here now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, sorry, my camera just left for some reason, but that's all right. Yeah, so these are the emissions that we've been focusing on. Now, with this bottom-up analysis, so this might not perfectly match other kind of estimates of emissions for Skopje, but this it's pretty accurate from what we've seen. This is the current situation for Skopje in terms of carbon emissions and of air pollution. So we have about 1.7 megatons of carbon dioxide emissions from these sectors today. As Robert mentioned, the buildings and heating sector looks fairly small here, and that's for 2 reasons. First of all electricity-based heating is accounted for in the electricity sector instead, so a lot of this electricity is used for heating. And second of all, a lot of wood is used, which is kind of biogenic, and so the assumption is that using wood is not fossil carbon, and so that carbon will be reabsorbed into forests if they regrow. It is interesting to note that if we don't assume that, then we have an additional 230 kilotons of carbon that's emitted by wood incineration, which is around then 14% additional of carbon dioxide emissions, which would make the heating sector quite a lot larger. For air pollution, every year at the moment, we estimate that around 381 million euros of kind of health impacts and costs in terms of additional sicknesses, in terms of early deaths, and so on, are caused by air pollution generated by these systems. So it's an important point to note that this is not all air pollution in Skopje. There's air pollution that is generated by industry, but also that comes from other sources outside of the city and can flow into the city that cause health problems. But this is the air pollution that is generated within these systems within the city. And as you can see, buildings and heating stand for a lot of these emissions, and that's, I think, almost exclusively wood incineration. So out of these 76% of air pollution that is generated from heating, almost all of that, or 96% of that, comes from incineration of wood. So that is a very, very large source of air pollution generated in the city today, and we'll keep seeing that going forward in the results as well. But anything that can be done to reduce that practice has massive health implications and massive savings for the health of citizens. So to impact this situation today, we looked at two different scenarios. Now, everything that Robert presented is this net zero scenario, which we think is a very interesting scenario to envision and analyze. A very, very ambitious scenario where we have kind of stipulated targets for all these sectors that, with the goal of pretty much reducing all carbon emissions and almost all air pollution emissions until 2030. Now, this is not the only pathway to get there, but it represents a very, what we think is a likely way to be able to get there. And it has a heavy focus on electrifying transport and heating systems, and then also, of course, expanding renewables in the electricity system as a method of getting to net zero. We also found it interesting to also plug in kind of what we found as current targets for Skopje into the model and see what the results would be. So this scenario, the current target scenario, is based on the current targets that are being discussed or already set for Skopje. And for the measures where we couldn't find any current targets, we have kind of assumed targets based on previously analyzed cities that we worked with previously. So if you compare these two scenarios in terms of the impact on these emissions that we looked at previously, the current targets give us an emissions reduction for carbon of about 33%. So a large reduction, absolutely. And we see large reductions in electricity emissions and also transportation emissions. Heating emissions kind of, I think, breaking even. And for air pollution, even these targets have a very large impact on air pollution. So we remove close to half of all the air pollution costs associated with air pollution generated in the city with these targets. Now, comparing that to the net zero scenario, I think Robert already showed this graph, but we assume targets that get us to an almost 100% reduction in carbon emissions. And then that also results in a very large reduction in air pollution emissions, so 91% reduced. And the main difference in air pollution emissions between the two targets, or the two scenarios, is that heating emissions from wood incineration is removed in both scenarios, but in the net zero scenario, the really large expansion of renewable electricity also removes a lot of emissions that then come from electricity generation or electricity use. I'll stop there for any potential questions before moving on. I'll just give you 30 seconds. No? All right. We'll have a larger question session at the end as well. So if you come up with any new questions after this, there will be plenty of chances to ask them. Okay, so looking at these two scenarios, what are kind of the economic implications of implementing these? As we already saw, there are a lot of investments needed to get to these scenarios. Even for the current target scenario, we estimate 850 million euros of total investment needed to kind of get to this point. And that's a large amount of that goes into the electricity system and also building renovations and heating. In the net zero scenario, again, it's over 2.2 billion euros, fairly evenly split between transportation, buildings, heating, and electricity systems. And as Robert mentioned, this is total investments to be made by the entire society or the entire kind of community around the city. So this is not only municipality making these investments, but also private citizens, private companies, and other funding sources. And so the city needs to take kind of a more of a enabling role in kind of driving and enabling these investments and coming up with new innovative ways of finding and driving investments into these sources to get to this point. Again, a large amount of money, but as we saw already previously, in both scenarios, these investments really pay off. So already in direct cost savings from using less energy, as Robert mentioned, both scenarios pay off massively, and actually, indeed, the less ambitious targets pay off more in terms of percentages, as kind of what we do on top of these current targets to reach a net zero scenario may be kind of less low-hanging fruit or slightly less efficient. But nonetheless, everything we do put together has a very positive scenario, even just accounting for energy savings. And again, when including health savings on top of that, we reach really, really positive scenarios. Now, it's important to state that every single measure is not necessarily economically positive on its own. I think most measures are for Skopje, but more or less so. And so it's very important to consider this transition as a larger program as much as possible, to do these things in conjunction together, so that you resist the temptation of doing the really, really economically beneficial things and then leaving the remaining things that may be less economically beneficial or even not economically beneficial, so that you don't get the full potential of decarbonization and air pollution reduction. But try to do everything together if possible to get this full positive economic case and use that economic case to drive the full transition. Let's get this. Okay, so that was the scenarios. And for the rest of the presentation, just to keep things a bit simple, we will now focus again on this net zero scenario, the more ambitious scenario. Now, Robert mentioned already a lot that the city isn't the major investor in this transition. It invests a lot, but even larger investments also need to come from other stakeholders. And so we've done quite a deep analysis of different stakeholder groups, the investments they need to make and the benefits they stand to gain from this transition. And this is a very interesting result, detailed on the slide. So as we can see, most stakeholder groups, be it property owners, private citizens, utilities, transport operators, and the municipality itself, need to make large investments, but the benefits from these investments do not accrue in this proportionally to whoever makes the investments. And this is a main factor for why this kind of transition is not already happening today. Some stakeholders, like utilities, need to make really large investments, property owners, but don't actually accrue a lot of the benefits, whilst other stakeholder groups like citizens have a very, very positive economic case if all of this is done. And so this kind of guides what is needed to be done in terms of policy and redistribution measures to make sure that these investments can be done and to assist those that don't necessarily have a great economic case to make these investments anyway, so that the whole society can benefit. Just giving me a couple more seconds on the slide because I think it's pretty heavy.
Yeah, that's okay, Kasper. I can just add a bit. So I know that the notion of land value capture is for many kind of a known term in kind of urban development and investments, that one kind of builds public transport infrastructure that improves land value. Some of that value is then used or it's captured to finance parts of the public transport infrastructure. So that is quite a kind of a common scheme that's been used in Europe, in the US, Australia, and so on. And in this situation, I think we have a very similar kind of economic situation, that there is a lot of value that is, or economic value that's generated from these investments. But to enable these investments, some of that value needs to be captured to finance the investments that need to happen. So I think kind of bringing that kind of the mindset from the land value capture schemes into this and seeing kind of how can one capture parts of this value to enable kind of structuring projects and structuring business models so it can enable financing to happen. Because of course, all loans and all investors, they need the payback to do the investments. So the one needs to then kind of construct those payment mechanisms and business models to enable that. So I think maybe this is one of them. It's a very complicated slide, but maybe it's one of the most important ones.
Absolutely. Thanks, Robert. All right. As Robert mentioned, we've also kind of deep dived for Skopje on economic stimulus and job creation from this transition. And so we've looked at 3 different areas as really important for kind of economic stimulus from what we are doing here in these investments. And these range from kind of very direct to more indirect. The most direct effects, of course, is what Robert mentioned before, which is direct creation of jobs. We make investments in things that need to be done within the city or close to the city, such as installing solar panels and installing charging points for electrical vehicles. And that requires people to do it, and so creates employment opportunities in the city. And we've estimated this to a total of 15,000 job years within the next 10-year period of these investments. We also have, as we've seen before, a lot of total cost savings. In total, we save around 1.8 billion in the next 10 years. And every euro that is saved is a euro that can then potentially be spent, instead of being spent on petrol or energy, on other things that can be purchased. So we have just marginal disposable income that can be spent on other things, which then generates economic stimulus as well, more indirectly. And the third point is kind of shifting home energy costs and shifting home investments. Costs, as Robert mentioned previously as well, that used to be spent on kind of buying fossil fuels, which to a large extent come from outside of the country, crude oil and natural gas, can instead be spent on buying electricity to fuel your car instead. And electricity is to a larger extent generated kind of close to the city or within the country. And so has an economic effect of, instead of the money leaving the country, it stays in the country and continues to generate economic activity. Leo, you've done this analysis about the jobs. Do you want to just make a few comments on this slide?
Yes, thank you, Gasper. So as we've mentioned, from the ambitious decarbonization scenario, we're going to be creating 15,000 jobs over the next 10 years. And we've seen this graph already, but we're just going to delve into it in a bit more detail. And so for the active transport infrastructure, what we're talking about here is construction of bicycle lanes and walking pathways. And this will mobilize the regional construction force. And then for electric vehicle charging network, it's a big part of this is the installation of the charging stations. And this will require specialization in who will be doing this, and also coordination with suppliers of the equipment. And then for the bus rapid transport network, we've just heard that this has already been started, and that's very, or it has been proposed at least, and that's very exciting. So I won't go into that one anymore. And then we look at the 2 biggest ones here, renewable electricity. And so that's installation of wind turbines and rooftop and centralized solar. And so that's both a combination, again, that's with the local worker force, but also with external suppliers. And then finally, building envelope renovations, which is the largest part here, comes a lot from the regional worker force, which is also very positive. Now, I would just like to mention something interesting about this slide is that if you look at the middle column here, we have estimated 22.5 full-time employees for €1 million invested. So basically these jobs, we've come to this number by looking at the investment that we put into each of these measures. So this doesn't take into account secondary measures creating other jobs. So in practice, economic stimulus could create jobs that become self-sustaining and resulting in more job years than shown here. So this is just a standard number for the investment. So there could be, and there probably would be, more jobs created than the 15,000 that we show here. It's just important to take that into note when looking at these numbers.
Perfect. Thanks, Leonardo. Great. I think we've already shown this cash flow graph. So just a note that even with direct cash flows, we're seeing kind of savings that happen fairly quickly. So even though we count savings all the way up to 2050, we actually break even sometime around 2030 or a little bit after 2030. And after that, cash flow is entirely positive. Another interesting point is that, of course, the economic stimulus effect of these direct cost savings depends a lot on exactly how these investments are structured and financed. if a private citizen can get investment assistance or loan or something like that to make an investment, such as purchasing an electric car, and then can kind of gain all the benefits and cost savings of that themselves, that is of course a very large economic stimulus effect for their disposable income that then they can then spend on other things. So that's also important to keep in consideration. Now for details here, we just wanted to highlight some of the most kind of short-term beneficial measures that we've analyzed in terms of kind of cost savings in the short term. So in the next kind of only up until 2025, we have 4 measures here that are already cash flow positive. And these are all transportation measures, which is kind of something we see very often, transportation measures being measures where not necessarily a lot of investment may be required, but instead behavioral change is the main driver of kind of making people use their car less and use the buses more, or carpool to work, or reducing the transportation and working from home. And so that doesn't require a large investment, but in the short term can generate very large savings. So these are just things to keep in mind for kind of having a very quick and low-hanging fruit cost saving. Again, I think we already showed this slide to the left here with monetary flows, and Robert explained that very well. I just wanted to expand a little bit on an interesting point around specifically the energy use and these cost savings. So looking at kind of the total expenditure for energy today, or actually without and with this transition, we see that kind of in the current situation with the current systems, we spend a lot of money on petrol and other fossil fuels for heating and electricity, which to a large extent do kind of come from international sources. We import crude oil, we import natural gas to a large extent, and shifting that towards renewable systems based on very much electricity and also biomass, which is to a much larger extent generated within the country or close to the city, is what drives a lot of this kind of net flow of money to stay more within the city and the region when we go through this transition. Okay, we have another opportunity for question and discussion.
Hi, Casper. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Alexander.
Hi, I raised my hand 2 times, but okay. I have some questions for you. I saw that if you want to go 2 slides back on the costs, so the costs are decreasing, I suppose, because of discounting, or what's the reason why the cost is decreasing, the savings? Why the savings, cost saving right. Energy is decreasing because of the discounting reasons or something else?
Yes. No, so, it is both discounting, but primarily here is, as these are kind of absolute numbers. So it's not discounting here, but what it's actually is as the cost savings only accrue over the asset lifetime. So if you have for example, if you take an electric car, you have cost savings for when you drive it, but it does not have an infinite lifetime. So of course that investment will basically, it reaches its end of life.
But most of the investment are in the building sector. So the savings in the building sector, I suppose that will continue for 40 years. How many years you're projecting that the cost is the lifetime of one building? Yes, what is the lifetime of one building?
Yeah, I think we account for those savings until 2050, but a lot of savings accrue in many other sectors as well. But yeah, we have kind of set lifetimes for all different assets that are being invested in.
Because if you go to, I think 2 slides back, there is a savings per sector, I think, here. No, these are the employees. No, where?
I'm not sure we have that.
I think you meant the distribution slide per stakeholder. There you have. So here you have savings by property owners, that's 0.4. So that's, I guess, part of that would be energy savings from energy efficiency or investments in buildings. But a lot of the savings for citizens, for example, that is investment in the transportation and mobility system. And those assets will not last until 2050.
Okay, this is, to be honest, it's okay. About the jobs, how did you calculate the number of jobs? 15,000 jobs, and here you have the jobs in renewable energy, and I saw that 600 millions of euros you're planning for the investment in the electricity, but I didn't see any information about the capacity that you're planning to be built in the city regarding the electricity.
So for your first question, we've calculated these jobs, as Leonardo mentioned, based kind of simply on the total investment, as you say, and then multiplied by what literature says about how many jobs are usually created per million invested or per megawatt in the case.
It's okay, yeah.
And yeah, we invest around 600 million euros in renewable electricity. And sorry, what was your question again?
So you're investing 600 millions in electricity, but I didn't see the installed capacity that are planned for Skopje. PV, wind, what you are planning in the renewable electricity in the city of Skopje. I didn't see that information.
As far as I remember, since we set the target of 100% renewable electricity, essentially, we project the electricity demand until 2030 based on kind of electrifying transport, electrifying heating system.
You're planning the whole electricity that are spent in the city of Skopje in 2030 to be produced by renewable.
Yes. Correct.
And the overall amount of electricity produced by renewable will be located in Skopje or in some other cities? That's my question.
Yes, right. So a big portion of that will of course have to be utility scale projects outside of the city that basically feeds electricity into the grid. Of course, rooftop solar will not be able to supply that amount of electricity.
Okay, this is very important because we are presenting the action plan for the city of Skopje, and it should be clear that some amount of the money will be spent for the investment in other cities, not in the city of Skopje. That is very important. Also about I'm surprised that this rapid bus transport network will create 2,000 jobs. I'm surprised that this is half of the renewable electricity. I'm surprised from these numbers. And about
I can just clarify that. But we calculated for the bus network is not only kind of investments in setting up the network, but also kind of jobs generated from the operation of this network. So operational costs like bus drivers and maintenance of buses and so on are included in that over the 10-year period. Perhaps that is the difference.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, did you have another question? I interrupted you. But,
no, I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Kasper, there is one question from Igor from UNDP Acceleration Lab. Can you make a small deliberation on the transportation point you have made in the presentation?
Maybe we can ask Igor to elaborate a little bit on his question. Yes. So I'm not sure if I fully understand it.
You have made, if you can, sorry for my voice. If you can go back a couple of slides. Yeah. transport operators.
Okay, so what we mean by transport operators and yeah, okay, no, so transport operators, and this is a bit kind of, it's a bit different how it is organized in different cities, but so this is basically the either authority or private company that is kind of responsible for both financing and operating the public transport infrastructure and kind of operations. In some cities, this is split into basically a kind of municipal authority, and then it's a private company that basically has the bus drivers, for example. But so this is putting together both the transport operators, so the ones that operate the public transport, but also the one that owns the assets. So it is basically putting all of those together. We are not separating between what is kind of the regional or the local authority and what is a private operator running the public transport operations.
In addition, I think we also include private companies that do freight transport, so companies that own and operate trucks for freight within the city as well, which is where a lot of the savings accrue from, kind of optimizing their logistical routes and electrifying their trucks.
Yeah, so, very good point, Casper. Thank you.
That answer your question?
Thank you.
Good. Any more questions?
Hi, Casper. Tena here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Tena.
Hi. So I would have a question/comment, but no, it's primarily a question on the importance of innovation. So if current market prices do not reflect the current cost of polluting, depleting natural resources, etc., then private companies, the private sector, or in general, the economic actors, they will not be induced to innovate. And in addition, consumers will not be induced to change their behavior or pay for the cost of polluting. So I was just wondering whether you have kind of calculated the potential benefits of some of the new innovations and technologies, the whole R&D potential of climate change sector, in calculating some of the potential benefits that this would bring about. And especially when it comes to some of the prices or the value that you have put in your calculations when it comes to renewables, say, because what was a cutting edge component or equipment back in the 50s or 60s, you can today buy off the shelf probably. So, I mean, did you kind of envision the space and the value of innovation and the potential value it has in this whole scenario?
Yeah, good question. Robert, do you want to take this one actually?
Yeah, I can jump in and please add if you want to as well. No, so Tena, I think that is a very important question. And kind of first of all, we should say that we have not kind of calculated or tried even to kind of quantify the impact of innovation. That's a very complicated or kind of how one would frame that. But I think in one way you could say that none of this is possible without innovation. So innovation really in business models and in kind of how you structure financing, how you get together different stakeholders, how you create partnerships across the public and private sector and so on. You know, innovation across that space is kind of fundamentally necessary to be able to deliver on this. So that is of course crucial in this transition. And I say, as you rightly pointed out, that a lot of this will not happen under the current market conditions and the current kind of setups. That one needs to find the new business models that will allow kind of projects to be structured and that they can be financed, that will allow then kind of some of the savings to basically accrue to the investors so that they can invest actually in this transition. So it's absolutely necessary to enable this, but we have not kind of quantified the impact of this. But I would say that without it, this won't be possible.
Absolutely. I would just add to that that the thing that we have included in the modeling is kind of what you mentioned in kind of cost decreases of technology over time, something being less expensive and more available now than in the 50s. That is a little bit more predictable. And so we have kind of made estimates based on literature for kind of the cost of solar panels, for example, continuing to go down over the years when we make these investments. Same thing for electrical vehicles and batteries and things like that. So that is kind of one aspect of innovation that has been included in the calculations.
Casper, I would like just to jump in, following what Robert said about innovation. We already took a little bit step forward and started thinking about how we can develop new kind of financial models that can support this kind of a transition. And this is actually what should be coming next by the end of the year. We are working on development on local government impact investment model and government structure that can enable further investment in new types of models and mechanisms to happen to enable this transition to start on. That's just like a little bit of insight what is coming next by the end of the year. So yeah, you can go further.
Thanks, Pia. Super interesting. Okay, let's just run through the last few slides we have. It's not going to be a lot now. We have just 3 slides on kind of sector by sector recommendations, going a little bit deeper, and then we can have additional questions for the rest of the time. So going through the 3 main sectors just a little bit more in detail. So this is kind of the situation if we only look at the transportation sector. So for this net zero scenario, we can abate 52% of carbon emissions in transportation only by the things that we do within the transportation sector. So the remaining 200 kilotons will need to be removed by decarbonizing the electricity system as well. But this kind of assumes full electrification, and then these emissions remain based on the current electricity system and current emissions from electricity that we have today. The economic case for only decarbonizing the transportation system is highly positive, even only looking at buying less petrol and moving that over to electricity. And it also accrues a lot of health benefits from reduced air pollution, but also things like increasing the amount of walking and cycling we do, reducing noise pollution, traffic accidents, and so on. Now, just some key actions. I think we already touched on a lot of these, but to move forward with. So for electrical vehicles, first of all, exploring options to kind of support the financing of these vehicles. As Robert mentioned, electrical vehicles are over their lifetime highly economically beneficial, but they are expensive to purchase, and then that kind of pays off as you have reduced energy costs over time. So there is a need to kind of support the financing for certain private individuals and companies to kind of do that initial purchase and then reap the benefits afterwards. There's also a large need for charging infrastructure to make these vehicles viable. An electric vehicle without charging infrastructure is not going to be very useful. So there needs to be kind of a plan and rollout of that infrastructure as well, and the financing of that. Now for the rest of, yeah, sorry.
I'm not sure if Alexander have a question for now, or it's still the hand raised from before.
I have one question more, sorry, I forgot, about the externalities, about the health costs. Did you take into consideration some country-specific costs, or you have used some international costs for calculation of these externalities?
No, we have used as much as possible, so the North Macedonian data points. They're from international studies, most of them, as I remember. But they should be specific to Skopje and North Macedonia.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure. Okay. So for the other measures aside from electrification, as mentioned, these have a lot to do with kind of, they're less about large investments and more about behavioral change. So, but there is a need to kind of expand alternative transport options, such as the bus rapid transport system that is now being considered, but also kind of expanding bicycle and walking paths. But then aside from that, to be innovative with policy and kind of programs to make people change their behavior, to use their car less and take the bus or walk or work from home. So that is something to start with as soon as possible as well. And as we show, that has kind of very large potential for economic benefits if you if you can make that right. For the kind of buildings and heating sector, which we bundled together in one, there is again, large opportunity for decarbonization, and the remaining emissions here are the ones from electricity that is needed when we've kind of fully shifted over to electrical heating with heat pumps. And kind of the economic case with only kind of direct energy savings is fairly close to break even, but very, very large health benefits are to be gained by kind of reducing the wood incineration used for heating today. And so this total case for heating is very, very positive. Now, the main key actions for this are to kind of first set up a plan for this heating transition to both expand the district heating network and also crucially replace local heating systems with kind of more efficient heat pumps or potentially better biomass systems where possible, but also kind of to explore financing options for how to do that and how to capture those large health benefits that may not be kind of directly visible and may kind of be a little bit difficult to monetize, but are very, very real for the citizens of Skopje. And so the main challenge here is kind of to how do we utilize these very large and very real benefits to kind of drive and finance this investment that will make a large difference to citizens. We've also seen from previous cities that for building renovations, it can be very important to not kind of have separate programs for renovating insulation and then renovating the heating system and then perhaps upgrading appliances or lighting to be more efficient, but to kind of put together all of this into one program as much as possible. And so for each kind of renovation you do, to both improve insulation and also replace the heating system. If you do these kind of out of sync, it's possible to kind of put in a way too large heating system, and then when you insulate the house, the capacity of that heating system is way too large because the heating need is now drastically reduced. So putting that together as much as possible into one program can be very beneficial. Finally, for the electricity system, very, very large carbon savings can be done by moving to renewable electricity generation. This is a key enabler for the other sectors as well and for the whole transition. As we've mentioned, the transition means that both transport and heating systems move to being based a lot on electricity, and so a lot of emissions will come from electricity. And this puts a large amount of challenges, both in terms of increasing electricity demand, but also in terms of grid infrastructure and other infrastructure around the electricity, such as storage when moving to more renewable electricity. And this also requires a large amount of financing. As we mentioned, 600 million euros for the coming 10 years is our estimate here, which breaks even around about with direct benefits from kind of lower fuel costs from purchasing less fossil fuels, but also has a very positive economic case when also considering health benefits from less air pollution and so on. And furthermore is again, completely crucial for the full transition of transport and heating systems as well. Finally, we just want to make a point of the Scope 3 emissions. Now, Scope 3 emissions have not been included in the kind of main analysis for Skopje, but we have made kind of a little back of the envelope calculation of what a transition within Scope 3 could mean. So Scope 3 emissions today are quite a large proportion of total Scope 1 through 3 emissions for the city. And these are consumption-based things, and the largest portions of consumption-based emissions come from current food patterns, so eating a lot of very carbon-intensive food, and also using building materials that are very carbon-intensive. And so by modeling a few measures and interventions within these sectors, such as diet changes, moving to a more low carbon diet, which is using less meat and more vegetables, and also using more efficient building materials, we see potential to reduce Scope 3 emissions as well by nearly half. Now, this is something that needs to be investigated further, and more analysis needs to be made. But we just wanted to make the point that the city should not only focus on Scope 1 and 2 emissions, but also keep in mind Scope 3 emissions. And a final point before we move to the final discussion is to not forget this thing we brought up in the beginning of the remaining half of emissions that come from industry, agriculture, and other emission sources that we have not analyzed today. A next step that would be very interesting would be to kind of expand the model as it looks today to also look at these emission sources and measures that could impact these emission sources, such as electrifying industrial processes, moving to more efficient agricultural practices, and introducing kind of circular economy practices to reduce consumption-based emissions. And that is a potentially very interesting next step. So with that, we have come to our final kind of questions and discussion session. So again, opening up the floor.
And if I may just kind of pose a question and also to the audience. As you have been working with climate action, environment, and investments in these areas for a long time, many of you, and you have worked with this Climate City Action Plan. What are your kind of reflections when seeing this, and how it kind of relates to the work that you have already done and the work that you have seen so far in the city? And how do you feel this could be useful kind of going forward, taking this perspective? So please, would be very interesting to hear from some of you that either have worked on in Skopje with this, but also on a national level, or from EBRD. And of course, as I mentioned before, we are happy to take individual discussions as well. I know it's end of a 2-hour session, and we are 38 people in the video room. So I think it may be difficult for some to engage in discussions. But feel free to reach out after this discussion as well, or this presentation, so we can take individual follow-ups to discuss further kind of some of these results that are maybe more interesting or more relevant to the specific areas that you are either responsible for or have worked in.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Yes, my name is Fabianka Pechinovska-Andonova, and I'm coming from the environmental consultancy sector. I like the presentation and results that you presented to us, especially the economic case methodology and how you apply it on the actions, decarbonization actions for City of Skopje. You are right. We worked on the activities and action plans on a national and regional and city level or municipality level. And usually we propose the actions and we calculate how much these investments or actions will cost. But not always we worked on the benefits, maybe on a descriptive way, but not to present it the economic value of these benefits. And it is very important. I wrote in a chat room, I wrote that this view is very important for the policymakers, for the City of Skopje, but also for others who are in charge to implement these action plans, to think about these benefits, to take them into account. And I think that it will be very easier for them to explain to the citizens, to all stakeholders, how each of us, everyone living in City of Skopje, can contribute and to the better place for living. But at the same time, we will have the financial benefits, economic benefits in our family house budget in the same time. So somehow to get this win-win situation where we all spend money, but also we can contribute to the better air quality or transport in our city. So I like this approach, and I think that we can somehow take this into account and maybe practice this with during the developing the other action plans. Definitely. Thanks a lot. It was very interesting for me and my colleagues in EcoMosaic.
Yep, thank you. So, anyone else? And otherwise, maybe Sophia or Tim, if you want to have some final comments as well on the way forward, or your thoughts of where we are.
Thanks, Robert. I'll go first to Tim to see if he has to make some final comments.
Well, thanks all. I don't want to take too much more time at the end of 2 hours, but just to emphasize the points that were made, I think this helps us see part of the journey. There's more to do. Really welcome feedback on points. Thanks a lot for the last one around how this helps your work across the whole community. Have a look at part of what we've shared in terms of the blog, because the next step is also working with the Bankers Without Boundaries team on financing mechanisms for getting this work done. But let's leave it there and hope to continue the conversation. Thanks a lot to the Material Economics team for a very clear overview today. There is a longer version of the report coming, so more to read. And Sophia, back to you.
Thanks, Tim. There is one question in the chat. It's from Michael. Asking, I was wondering if one could compare the leverage of investing in better air quality measures in the industrial sector as compared to the public and private sector included here.
Yes, absolutely. So we haven't done that analysis for Skopje. We have looked at investments in heavy industry in many other countries, but we have not done it for Skopje here. But one analysis that we didn't show here, but that can come in the final report is, of course, comparing the cost efficiency of different investments in different areas, and how that both comparing then basically the ROI or the cost efficiency of investing compared to how much cost savings one would get in both air quality, but also in direct energy savings. And there I would assume, and depending on, of course, the age of the heavy industry assets and the existing air filters and so on, that maybe some of those investments would have an even higher impact on air quality. So yes, that's absolutely possible to do, but we have not done it in this work yet.
Thank you, Robert. So if there is no more question from our audience, I think we can conclude this session here. We've never been so precise, finishing in exactly the hour we plan. Before I go with the final words, I would just like to add on what Robert mentioned in terms of further doing the analysis in this scope. I think as Skopje, one of the 5 cities in this Future City initiative, was very lucky because of the proactive work and collaboration between partners, especially the City of Skopje, to get actually the team of Material Economics working on this economic case, while the other cities are still waiting for. So in future, of course, if everyone from the stakeholders and partners working in the issue see any potential benefit to enlarge the scope of the analysis, we can, of course, work together and go over into different streams that we think will be very important for Skopje. And of course, try to find and work on developing different governance models and financial mechanisms to help us achieve this work in future. I would like to thanks on the end to everyone that could make it today to this presentation. All the materials it's going to be shared after we receive the final document from Material Economics. This session is also recorded, so for the ones that maybe want to share it with their colleagues, I will also share a link to it so you can get back again in future. And for any additional question on the work we are doing with the future cities in Skopje, feel free to get in touch with us. There are several critical activities and measures we are taking by the end of this year. As I mentioned before, the development of the local economic impact investment model for the city, trying to test different instruments from 2021, the financial mechanism developing on the regional level with the other 5 cities, as well as the final second analysis of all the strategic papers and documents the city is working on, and seeing how that reflects on the priorities, the national one, the local one, but also the priorities the citizens see in the future, and as well the priorities of the international agencies working in this country. So thanks once more to all, and looking forward to see you in some other occasion. Thanks to Material Economics team for today, and talk to you and hopefully see you soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Bye bye. Bye.
Wish you a nice day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.